Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week and looking forward to a great weekend. So today, I'm going to deviate a little bit and go over three topics that are all quite interesting and also very concerning, and they also kind of show the direction of our country right now, and you'll get a better idea how these things tie together as I go over them. So the first thing I'm going to go over is something that I'm sure a lot of people have seen on the news in the last really 36 hours, and that's the sports gambling corruption that's going on in the United States right now. It was announced late Wednesday night, and then it was on the news all day yesterday, how three sports figures were arrested. In fact, one of these arrests took place in Orlando yesterday. So the three principals, one was a well-known basketball player who is now a head coach in the NBA, Chauncey Billups. One is a current player who's been under investigation for a couple of years, Terry Rozier. He was the one that arrested in Orlando, and he plays for the Miami Heat. And then the third one was a retired player who had also done coaching, Damon Jones. And the thing I'm going to tie this into a few things relating to our society. Basically, without boring you too much with the particulars, but let me give you an overview so that what I say will make a little bit more sense. Terry Rozier and Damon Jones were arrested on somewhat related things. Basically, sports gambling became legal a few years ago outside of Las Vegas. Prior to then, the only place you could make legal bets was in Las Vegas. I mean, for years and years, people have bet with bookmakers, which is illegal. Bookmakers are kind of private businessmen, for lack of a better term, that take bets on sporting events, and it was illegal. But because people like betting, a lot of people bet with bookmakers. But in order to generate money for the government, and also theoretically to make it more transparent and to reduce the imprint of crime, it became legal in numerous states, online betting sites and different things of that nature. So the reason it's gotten so bad now, because I'm a libertarian at heart, so if you have demand for something, you might as well legalize it and have some government oversight and controls on it. But it got way out of proportion, in my opinion, because what happened is when everybody saw how much money this is going to generate, our sports leagues, meaning the National Basketball Association, which is where these arrests have taken place recently, the National Football League, and Major League Baseball, they went in full throttle and became partners with some of these different betting organizations like FanDuel and whatnot. They run these graphics continually during games on what they call proposition bets. They just really encourage gambling to the utmost. And keep in mind that gambling can become a sickness. It's just like drug addiction, alcohol addiction. So the more people that gamble, the more potential gambling addicts you're going to have. And obviously, when you're an addict, it doesn't bode well for your financial wherewithal and, of course, your family. But the point of bringing the sports leagues into this is because they've gotten really greedy, and they've encouraged all these kind of unusual bets. So, for example, the Orlando Magic's playing tonight. So let's just pick out one of their players. They picked up a player in the offseason, Desmond Bain, who's a very good player. So let's say the odds makers for legalized gambling said we're going to put up the over and under line for Desmond Baines tonight at 17 points. And I'm just simplifying this. So what does that mean? Well, that means that somebody could make a bet saying that Desmond Baines was going to score more or less than 17 points. So if you said he was going to score less than 17 points and he scored 16 points, you would win that bet. So they have those proposition bets on a lot of players in the different sports, but basketball is probably the easiest example. So what happened with Terry Rozier, allegedly, is they put up a line on one of his games a couple years ago, and he told some confederates of his that he was going to come out of the game with an injury in the first 10 minutes of the game. So he came out of the game with an injury after 10 minutes, and he had a sports line, let's say, of that game, and I don't know the exact number, maybe 13 points and maybe a certain amount of assists, etc. Well, because they knew he was coming out of the game early, they had a huge amount of money bet that he would score less than those points. And so those gamblers obviously won a lot of money on that bet, and Terry Rozier was involved in revealing that information, and allegedly he profited also on that. Another situation was Damon Jones, who was friends with LeBron James, and when he found out from LeBron James a couple years ago that LeBron James had an injury that really hadn't been shared on the media and was going to miss a game, he told a bunch of gamblers, and of course they bet to go under whatever the betting line was on LeBron James, and they won a lot of money. And then the last thing is Chauncey Billups, was somehow involved in these high-priced poker games, and he allegedly attracted celebrities and other athletes to play in these games. And these were not sponsored games. These were actually illegal poker games, because poker is only legal in casino environments and whatnot. But poker games have gone on for, years and years, but these are big money games where you're talking about a lot of money at risk. Well, it just so happened that there was all these high-tech things that would cheat the players, and these were all supposedly involving and sponsored by organized crime. In this case, they mentioned the mafia. And so he profited by bringing in these players into these games. And so there's just been a proliferation of gambling. And again, the byproduct of this is money. Everybody wants to make money. And because it's legal, quote unquote, and because all the professional sports leagues are encouraging this, and keep in mind the professional sports leagues make a lot of money from this because they get paid to advertise this stuff, and it increases fan viewership on TV. It increases fans that go to the game because they have a vested financial interest in the game or a player. And unfortunately, we're a country of extremes. We go from one extreme to the other. We go from no gambling to a ridiculous amount of gambling, just like we go from being way permissive in a society, what you would call overly liberal, to then a society to correct it of overly conservative. We continually overreact and don't try to gauge the consequences. So this gambling thing, this is just the ice of the tip of the iceberg. You're going to see over the next few years probably a lot more incidents of gambling and arrests and stuff. And it fits right into the narrative of the way our government's operating. The actual head of the FBI had a press conference, got all this national publicity. So it gives the impression that the government's really cracking down on organized crime. But that's a distraction because they're not cracking down. We have, as you've heard me talk about, with open gun carry and stuff, we have more gun shootings than we've ever had. So it's just creating perceptions. Our current government is great at creating a narrative that frequently is far from reality. So how does that tie into other things I'm talking about? Well, these things all center around money, and I'm for capitalism, but it has to be tempered with good decision making and morals, and we seem to have lost our moral compass. Well, another thing that was in the news the last couple days is the great White House expansion, or the ballroom that's being built. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but President Trump decided he wanted to do some major remodeling, and he's gonna build a gold-plated ballroom and other things that a lot of people feel are not really compatible with the concept of the White House. But that's a discussion for another day. But supposedly, these renovations and construction are going to run approximately $300 million. They've already gone well over budget in terms of their projections now. So how is he raising this money? Well, he's made a point of basically saying this is not going to come from the taxpayers, it's going to come from private donations. And from what I can tell and doing my own research, that's true. But let me tell you who they're getting the private donations from. This was a public list that came out. It actually came out in the Washington Post today. And so this is hot off the press. So take a look at these names. Amazon. And as you know, Amazon has many contracts with the U.S. government. And Jeff Bezos, the multi-billionaire, owns Amazon. And he's donated $1 million to the inauguration fund. Apple, obviously they're the biggest seller and developer of computers and cell phones in particular. They donated $1 million. And, interestingly, during a White House meeting with the CEO of Apple over the summer, President Trump announced that Apple will invest an additional $100 billion in U.S. jobs and suppliers. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. What's happened with these multi-billionaires and millionaires that control, especially these high-tech companies, it's kind of like pay to play. And what do I mean by that? There's not an arm's length relationship with the government, even though a lot of these folks in the past have come out really not in agreement with President Trump's policies. They've kept quiet now, and they're donating money to them, and they get preferential treatment from the government. So what does this do to our country? It creates more of the haves and have-nots. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And then the cost of these high-tech items continually increases. Google put forth $22 million, and believe it or not, that came from a settlement that Trump reached with the Google-owned video site YouTube. And if that's not kind of a pay-to-play, I don't know what is. Some other companies that are involved in the contribution to the ballroom, Microsoft, another big high-tech company that's a multi-billion-dollar company. Or any other companies, T-Mobile. There's been a person named Kelly Loeffler, who's a very wealthy businesswoman rather, and she was confirmed recently as the head of the Small Business Administration. And these are just a few of the high-profile people. It's just showing the continued transactional basis and corruption of the United States government. Politicians, by definition, you can't really trust a lot of what's being said, but corruption and pay to play is at a new level in the United States. And if, in my opinion and many other people, this is not good for the average citizen on the street. Most people are not even aware of these things, or they take the position that, well, there's nothing I can do about it. But it's just, it's very concerning. Now, I'm going to tie this back now into what are they actually doing for the construction? Well, the things that are completely concerning to me is they're actually demolishing the East Wing. And as part of this plan, what had been stated by President Trump was there wouldn't be demolition to any significance. It would be expansion, not demolition. So these are things that have, in some cases, been there for, 100+ years, and now it got demolished in a matter of a couple days. And this is just an example of what we refer to as the strongman or authoritarian playbook. The White House, as you've known, it goes by the acronym of the People's House. Well, they're going to change that name the way things are going to Trump's house. In my opinion, the White House it's a symbol of the independence that our country had, and Donald Trump is taking it as his personal playpen, and it's just very disturbing to me. I think you should do some research on this. I think it would be quite an eye-opening experience for people. When one person can change the architecture and the focus of the biggest landmark in the United States, if that isn't a sign of one person having a dominant position and being basically an authoritarian, he's remaking a landmark in the United States in his own vision. And I don't think that's a particularly good thing, and I don't think other people should either, but I did want to bring that to people's attention. The last thing I'm going to go over today, and it's really real estate related, but I'm going over this because it's a very important symbolic thing. And what is the definition of first impression? Well, according to some dictionary definitions, I'll read a couple things. A first impression is the initial judgment or perception a person forms about another individual or something new that can be based on factors like appearance. And first impressions tend to be persistent and sometimes can be hard to change. And a strong first impression, whether positive or negative, can significantly shape how people think of each other in the long term. And the reason I bring that up, obviously, those definitions pertain to your first impression of an individual. So in my business, in real estate, of course, I look at first impressions in two different ways. From the people standpoint, when I meet with a prospective customer, they're going to make a first impression of me probably in the first 60 seconds of our interaction. And of course, when I'm meeting with people, they're potential real estate customers, whether they're wanting to buy property, whether they want to sell property, whether they need my help in leasing property, whatever the case may be. So they may very well be interviewing other agents, and some of these people, I'm sure, that I'm referencing have been recommended to utilize my services. Other people have heard of me by reputation, but in either event, a lot of them have never met me. So the first impression that I provide them, good or bad, is going to heavily influence whether they hire my services or not. But I'm correlating that to real estate for the consumer. So I'll use that both for a seller and a buyer. But one of the things I always explain to sellers is when I go on an appointment with a seller and we review all the components of successfully selling their house, one of the things that I reference is staging. How can we most effectively and efficiently stage that house? I always try to make sure that the recommendations I give people are realistic based on their house's situation. And of course, I try to make sure that I'm not spending a lot of their money. It's just common sense things that are going to help put their home in the most favorable light. And I'm correlating that to first impressions, because one of the things that I emphasize to sellers is that first impression is so important. When somebody walks into your house and is looking to buy a house, if they get a negative first impression over the first 60 seconds, maybe the house has a bad odor in it, maybe the house needs painting, maybe the flooring they initially see is not in very good condition, maybe the house is overly cluttered, maybe the house is overly personalized. Any of those things will adversely affect a person's opinion. And even if your house has a lot of great concepts and it's in a very popular neighborhood and it has certain attributes, if their first impression is not positive, they're going to tend to overlook the attributes. And one of two things is typically going to happen. They're either going to eliminate your house from consideration, or if they will consider your house, they're going to come in with a much lower offer, because buyers by definition would prefer a house in move-in condition, but if they're willing to do some things, they're going to exaggerate the cost for doing those things. So I always try to instruct my customers that not only the better presentation, but the more cosmetic related things we can eliminate, the more successful we're going to be in selling your house promptly and for a higher price. And from a buyer's point of view, obviously these same things take place. When a buyer walks in, as I've mentioned, they're going to form a strong opinion in the first 60 seconds. Now, I had a real life situation that happened a few days ago. I took some customers in to a house that we have for sale, and the sellers had pretty much moved most of their things out of there because they purchased another property, and so they were in the transition period. And while they had left the house reasonably neat, in other words, there wasn't a lot of debris or anything, what I call the warts in the house really showed up. Because when a house is sparsely decorated or vacant, you really see the cosmetic things that need addressing. So it's so important to try to address those things before people view the house. And in this particular case, even though I thought the house was fairly priced and the sellers were somewhat realistic about their end price, these particular buyers that I toured through the house really overly nitpicked the house. I mean, they really exaggerated its flaws. So their first impression had been formed very early on. And so no matter how I tried to address their commentary in a lower key fashion, because I thought a lot of their comments were dramatically overblown, they basically convinced themselves of the merit of what they were stating. So ultimately, they ended up making an offer, but it was so far below what the house was worth that the negotiations didn't go anywhere. And that's not, that situation happens a lot. So that's why I'm mentioning first impressions are really an important component. And I know I jumped around quite a bit today. You're probably scratching your head. We talked about the White House renovations and the influence that our wealthy corporate partners are kind of overlooking things if they can get favorable treatment by the government. We talked about the greed and sports gambling and how our professional sports leagues have really sold their soul in order to continue to make money. And then we talked about first impressions. We really need a societal reset in our country. I think we've gone way too far to the point of worshiping at the altar of the mighty dollar. And I also think that people are so consumed now with social media and just different things that are taking place in life that they've really, they're unaware of a lot of these things that are going on. And these are things that I think are quite important. And I feel I'm trying to do a service by bringing these topics up. So anyway, that's all for today. Hope you found this podcast interesting today and not too confusing. Everybody have a great weekend. Stay healthy. And this is Marty Kaiser out.